quick housekeeping items for today. We have, if you could please place yourself on mute, and we may already have been done that for you. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat room for your Zoom feature. And also please check your emails, because you should have received an Uber Eats gift card for your attendance today. And good news, I hear that you could also use it for Uber rides. So you can start collecting those if you didn't already use it for your meal today. A special thank you to Kavika's Painting, our March Platinum sponsor, for being here today, as well as you all for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know it's been very rainy and a lot of severe weather lately. An announcement, our next virtual meeting is Wednesday, April 14th. It's going to be our Disaster Preparedness Day program. And our speaker is going to be Brendan Larson, CEO and climatologist with Absolute Climo. Please visit bomahawaii.com for more information. Without further ado, I'm pleased to present Sean Dunham from Kavika's Painting. His program today is Procurement Methods for Commercial Projects, a contractor's experience and knowledge on how they have seen renovation and repair projects from start to finish, as well as the pros and cons regarding different methods. John Dunham is an estimator with Kavika's Painting. He graduated from University of Denver in 2010 with a degree in accounting and a minor in construction management. He has been with Kavika's Painting since his graduation and is a certified Master Painters Institute Maintenance Coding Specialist. Well, that's a tricky one. Well done, Sean, and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us here. So I'm going to share my screen here for a second to start the presentation. So thanks for coming and joining us today to kind of go over a presentation kind of relating to our experience with procurement methods for commercial projects, but you know, also hopefully it's able to be applied to a lot of other different ways that you you know, go about getting things done with vendors on your sites and projects. So a little bit about us. We have multiple licenses to mainly deal with the exterior of buildings. So we have our general contractor's license, our B license, our painting license, our window and door sealants license, our waterproofing license, which mostly people know for vehicular and pedestrian traffic coatings on like lanais and parking decks, the fluid applied roofing license, and the concrete restoration license. So we've kind of gathered all of these licenses, you know, through our years, as they're the ones that kind of touch on the items that need to, you know, be frequently maintained on the exterior of buildings here in Hawaii. So our team consists of David Dunham, the president, who started the business in '83, myself, who works as a project manager and estimator. And I've been here since, as she said, 2010. Our superintendent on Maui, Lionel, who's been with the company for 20 to 30 years and has been in the painting industry for 40 plus years. And also one of our other project managers and estimators, Steve Peterson, who has his degree in architecture, or his master's in architecture. One of our, or we feel one of our unique perspectives to kind of talk on this a little bit, is we do have offices on Oahu, Maui, and the Big Island. So we kind of see how different properties and different owners handle getting projects started off the ground across the state, and what are some of the pluses and minuses. But like I said, our experience in this issue is mainly in the private sector, but since we do have an apprenticeship program, we do work on public procure projects, such as, you know, working on elementary schools for the DOE, high schools for the DOE, or other state-owned properties. So we see kind of a little bit of a gamut in a very large bureaucratic organizations and how they handle the process, and then very small, or much smaller, down to single owners who are also managing their properties. So we do feel that this does that there are similarities between construction and other service industries in particular, and that some of the ways and methods and how to get the best results can translate across that. So hopefully, even if you don't have any construction projects coming up, you may be able to kind of organize and get ready for, maybe getting a new janitorial service provider or other services that are out there. So the three most common types of procurement are generally the design bid build, or what's sometimes called the traditional method, the design build, where the contractor drives the project in both the design and the building, and then the construction manager process, where essentially a consultant is brought in who's experienced with construction management and is managing the project as for the owner. So in general, in the design bid build, the owner contracts with a designer who puts together a bid package, usually including drawings, specification, and bid form. Then the contractors provide the pricing and the owners select the contractor and the contractor executes the work. So generally, you see this on larger, more complex projects. And so for here on example, we have a pool deck where we have the before photo on the right and the in progress, almost completed photo on the left. So, where they're totally looking at changing everything and getting everything to a whole new, aesthetic look and everything else. That's where you see a lot of these kinds of procurement process. So some of the pros is it does help to get all the contractors bidding on the same design and gives a lot of clarity to the project, as the designer has already worked with the owner to come up with exactly what they want at the end of the project. It's generally able to get the project to a fixed cost. And the designer carries some of the liability and coordinates quality and code requirements. Sometimes they also continue through the construction portion. And so they definitely they are also usually a legally regulated industry. So they're going to have like either an architect license or an engineering license. So they do have some legal requirements and duties to the owners. And like we said, the benefits for complex projects where there's a lot of different moving parts, there may be a lot of different trades. They do help to kind of wrap those all together. And so then that's kind of known as the design bid build. Some of the cons are that it can be quite time consuming, because as you can imagine, you have to also, instead of just procuring a contractor, you also have to go out and procure who you're actually going to use for your design team. And that takes time. That may take back and forth, trying to get multiple bids from them, try to compare them to each other to see how those line up. And then there's the whole process of doing the actual design, getting it to the owner approving it before it ever gets out. So it can tend to take a little bit longer on the total schedule of the project. So sometimes a struggle in a project with a tight deadline that the owner is trying to get done right away. There can be an opportunity for disconnect between design and cost, particularly when the owner wants something that's a little bit outside of the normal. The designer may not have a idea of what the final costs might be. And as they're also generally a little bit more cautious, they tend to stick with things that they know. They may not always have, in the more specialized trades, a broader experience with different products and different methods that may kind of keep them in a very kind of cautious area where they're not looking to try to find new things, or they don't have experience with different materials or different specialties that may bring some value engineering to the project. And of course, as you keep adding more parties to it, it can add costs. And there's definitely been an increase in specialization for all industries, including design, where they are looking at specialty plumbing consultants or specialty plumbing HVAC designers, versus maybe in the past where there was more just one architect or engineer involved in the entire project. So on the design build side, the owner approaches a contractor and they agree to both the design and construct the project, usually at a price or a budget that is set before the final design. The contractor then usually submits their plan and specification, and barring any major changes by the owner, then starts constructing the project. So this some may sound a little complicated, but design build is probably anytime you even just bring a contractor in to work on a one-off project. So it could be as simple as repainting the building if you're not going to bring a designer or any other party in, or it could be as complicated as building a new warehouse. But it's just a kind of a catch-all to cover that concept of working directly with a contractor or a vendor to come up with what you want and then execute on it. So it's generally faster, and there's usually a single point of contact. You're generally working directly with the contractor and the owner. And as such, that usually also holds the vendor responsible to the owner, since they were the ones that had to develop the whole scope and the design of everything. And it generally should be able to get to a fixed price. And generally the vendor or contractor is price conscious, since that's the one part that they are the most familiar with. What is the cost to get this done? What are the different options? What have they seen on different buildings? And generally we would recommend it more with someone who you've had previous projects with, or a trusted vendor. This can be a method to get a project off the ground, versus a vendor you've never worked with before, or in a type of project you've never done before. That can definitely be a big concern when you don't know them or have a history with them and how projects might move forward with them. So the cons is the contractor can shape the design with an interest in costs for a little bit. So essentially, the owner may not be as aware of what the other options are out there. And as you're going out and trying to get a project complete from that, you may not be aware that what they're proposing might not be the quality of materials or the quality of finish that you were originally looking for. And thus change orders, can become costly in time and money, where the contractors basically said, no, this is what I was going to do. And then the owner comes in and that's not what they were envisioning. And then either having to change everything or having to end up with a finished product that wasn't to the owner's thoughts or desires, or final what they were looking for, can end up making double work. Then of course, being able to compare different vendors that are coming in a design build process and trying to get them to apples between the bids can become fairly difficult, because you ask 3 different vendors to come up with the same price or the same item, and if the scope isn't quite clear, you may get some very wildly differing proposals coming back to you that can be hard to figure out which one is the right one. So whereas the construction management process is where a construction manager is hired by the owner to oversee the project and can either be in charge of the design and construction or just the construction phase of the project, but generally carries no liability or risk associated with design or construction aspect. So in these projects, they are usually essentially brought in as a consultant to give the owner advice and to perform other things for the owner. But at the end of the day, they're not necessarily, although a lot of them do come from the background of engineering or architecture and construction, they're not performing it in that same regulated industry, but they're bringing their experience to the owner for them to take advantage of. So these people should be very familiar with what different costs and different products should have an impact on a project. They should be able to review the project for quality and they really act as a liaison between the contractor, the designer, and the owner to kind of give a experience and try to help them navigate the project in that way. Um, but as you add on more and more layers, there's always additional costs that are added by that. And a clear definition of the responsibilities sometimes becomes a little bit harder with a construction manager um, because they essentially act as a go in between all the different parties. They don't always have the same legal definitions of what they are or are not responsible for. And then, of course, in the same way, when you're hiring a manager or a designer or a contractor, they don't always come with similar cost structures between the different um, CMs. Some are a percentage of contract. Some may provide a lump sum, an hourly rate, or a monthly retainer. And some may say certain things are under their responsibility and other things aren't. So being able to also compare their proposals and get them to be apples to apples can sometimes be difficult compared to other processes. So some of the common strategies for success that I think sometimes get a little bit missed um, is the first step is usually identifying the problem. So why are you bringing the vendor in? It's not uncommon for certain situations, like if a owner asks us to, they may say, "Hey, I want you guys to come in and apply elastomeric on my building." So we get a price together, give them the price to apply elastomeric, apply the elastomeric on the building, and then they come back and they say, "Why are my windows still leaking?" Um, you, essentially that sometimes by not starting with what is the actual thing that you're trying to fix and making sure that all the parties know that that is the intention of the project, you can end up leading the contractors and the proposals or the designer down the wrong road. So one of the good takeaways is, both as a vendor and as an owner, is to start with what is the problem that we're trying to fix with this, and then make sure that that's really kept up top throughout to make sure that that is what we are actually going after. And then kind of along a similar line is map out a little bit of what success and the final expectations are. So not just sometimes, we can all get a little bit lost in the details and trying to work out exactly like what are we going to do on the windows on this side or that, right? But you know, for example, pool decks are often one of those that what is success or expectations? Some buildings they may only be looking to make sure that they're not getting any leaks onto the car below the deck. Making sure that it's sound and structurally in good shape and that they're not going to have problems in the near future. Um, Other owners may be very concerned with making it look like a modern amenity that they can use to increase the value of their units. So not only just, you may identify the problem as only, hey, the pool deck is leaking and we don't like it anymore, but also saying, and at the end of this project, we want it to really be, a high class place that we can use in our marketing and other stuff, and we just want it to be, nice and solid for the next decade to come. So I think that those two things together can really help to set the project and what you're looking to get out of it on the back end, and even works well for whether or not you're starting with the designer, starting with the CM, or starting directly with a contractor. And a lot of times this can help to be developed by your industry partners or trusted vendors to develop what they call a RFP or RFQ, request for proposal or request for quote. By starting with identifying the problems and mapping out what you guys are looking for at the end of the project, the industry partners or vendors can also help you to kind of identify some of the problems that might pop up. Also help you identify what you should maybe include to make sure that the other parties know that you expect to be their responsibility, or what the owner or what responsibilities the owner is willing to take on themselves. Sometimes that can be as simple as some owners may be comfortable with removing landscaping or doing other things to help facilitate the project a little bit quicker with their maintenance staff, rather than having the contractor do it. Or some may want the contractor to do that because they don't have any maintenance staff on hand, or they don't feel like, or they feel that they're too busy doing other tasks. So, and then those are things that can be very easily missed in the initial, but by having it all written out really helps get all the different people on the same page. And then of course, assess your own experience and comfort level. Some projects are fairly simple. Like you may decide that you're very comfortable with, getting 3 bidders and setting up for a painting project. But an elevator maintenance replacement, you may not feel comfortable being the owner and being the main point of contact, and you may look at hiring a construction manager or hiring an architect to start with the design. And then how much flexibility do you want throughout the project? So generally, the more layers you add in communication, it can tend to create a little less flexibility. Whereas when an owner is dealing directly with the contractor, there can be a lot of flexibility. But as you start to add multiple layers, there's always more checks on it, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes changing something isn't the right decision, and the more people looking at it, the more likely you are to come to the correct decision. But depending on the type of project, flexibility may be one of the things you need if there's going to be a lot of changes throughout it. So when we talked about the RFP or RFQ, here I'm just providing a sample. It doesn't have to be necessarily complex, but a vendor should be able to help generate one with you for the project that you're looking at. And it's basically just looking at what do you want at the end of the project, and what are some of the items that are gonna be important. This one was a little bit more of a complex project, where they were looking at replacing a pool deck that had a built-up tile on it and a mortar bed, and switching it up to a pedestal paper system, while also updating possibly some of their pool equipments or other items. And so spending the time to really get all of the essentially the large bullet points of the project together and into one document, even after meeting with subs, getting that all together, giving it to the owner. The owner is then able to essentially take this document to other contractors and other bidders, or even to a designer at this point, and know that they're kind of getting at least the large items to a very similar finished bid. And this is upfront work that generally feels like a lot, but it's really just walking the site, taking the time, figuring out exactly what you're wanting and looking for, and then starting to quantify it. And it's definitely an option that you can get from vendors before you start approaching it, even in the larger, to other multiple vendors or designers. So an example of just a little project that we did that was design bid build, Colo Terrace. It was they were looking at a building where they didn't know what was going to be the best approach for them, but it was definitely outside of a simple approach. So they did bring in a designer up front who had experience with working with concrete walk-ups. And one of the major issues they were having was that their CMU railing wall was completely starting to fail. So they were starting to get some pretty extensive spalling inside the CMU system. The water was ponding up against the CMU on the inside of the wall. And so they weren't sure exactly what would be the best repair method, and they went with a designer who was able to make some recommendations and walk them through the cost benefit analysis. So one of the big things that they came up with at the end was that replacing the CMU with aluminum, even though it was more expensive than possibly just repairing the existing CMU, repairing in the limited areas was going to end up probably costing more over the next 20 to 30 years versus taking it out and putting in aluminum railings. And because this is a building that uses or rents mainly to students, they were a little bit concerned with aluminum railings and strength. So they felt a little more comfortable by adding some additional supports for the railing by going to the slab above at every other rail post versus just doing a more conventional railing system where there's no support to the floor above for the rail. But one of the things we were able to work with them in the original design, they had the posts going up and down on every in a single line. And one of the things that we worked with them in the railing guide was that instead of going up and down at the same post on every floor, between the floors, we offset it to the other post. And that was mainly just because due to slight variations in the building, we know from experience that sometimes these things just don't quite line up perfectly. And so when you have that single line going up and down, while it looks really nice on a set of drawings and it shows it being perfectly in line, it doesn't always quite match up to the eye that perfectly. So by offsetting it, we were able to make sure that they didn't have any issue with things, being a quarter or a half inch off, that the drawings would show perfectly lined. And so they were able to kind of take a little bit of that flexibility and work with us. And I think it came out to a little bit of a nicer look than just straight up and down. So, and just in general, they were also looking at upping the value of their property and being able to add to rent. So some other minor fixes around the property. So on another project though, Oahu Surf 1, it ended up being a design build in that the owner approached us as they had their property manager had worked with us on other projects, and they had worked with us at trade shows and on one of their previous construction projects back in the 90s. And they approached us and they asked us to come around their building because they knew that they were at the point where they needed to do some extensive maintenance around their property. And walking the property identified some general areas of scope, such as the painting, the installation of new traffic coding on their parking deck, small repairs around their building, including the parking deck, the lanais, their stairwells, their walkways, and also help them to get a paint spec that the other bidders could all bid apples to apples. So they had something to give to them. And then also the bid form that had the general scopes of work in it, including some quantities on the spall repair, so that they felt like they could get a number out of all the different bidders that was fairly similar to one and to each other. So some of the major concerns were along the lanais, full removal and installation of a traffic coding in the upper left, spall repairs inside across the building, although generally speaking, the poured in place concrete was in fairly good shape. And one of the things to also mention is that even though they approached us, one of the parts of the scopes was for us to go out and get the permit in conjunction with an engineer. So we were able to, once given the project, to get an engineer involved, have them develop a set of drawings and go to permit and get the permit before work starts. But one of the issues they identified very quickly in being in Waikiki was that parking is always a concern. So we were able to address that by using mortars that could be driven on in the same day as placement. So we would demo and open an area in the morning, treat the rebar, pour the concrete in the afternoon, and then they were able to park on the surface by about 6 p.m. in the evening, which allowed them to feel much more comfortable in the length and the amount of spall repair that was across the deck, that they were still able to get their owners in with temporary striping and have them, have them still have access. And one of the other things, also switching to two-component fast cure on the parking deck, cut down 2 days of shutdown for the owners versus conventional or the single component that we use on the lanais, where they're not as concerned with immediate access. But one of the big things that came up in this was that when we started opening one of the areas on the building, which was the enclosed stairwell, we were finding that the issue with the stairwell plaster wall was much worse than was able to be visually assessed from outside before the project started. So one of the things that was identified was that these C channels are supposed to be mechanically fastened to the slab edge before the installation of the stucco. And what we found was that the original construction had, or repairs that they had made at some other date, had not actually fastened these to the wall. And because the owner was comfortable with working with us, we were able to bring them 3 or 4 different options in repair, and included different options from different subs for the same, or different subs for the same repair scope, and was able to show them all the different repairs that we would recommend, and how long they were expected to last before the next time the repairs would have to be done again. And so the 3 basic options were to just repair as much as was readily identified in the scope as we start the demo, put back where we had the issue, and then basically they would continue to have to monitor this situation and do repairs over time. Fully remove and fully replace it in exact kind with stucco again, with the proper attachment points and everything else, or go to a exterior mounted aluminum railing system that would basically totally change the look of the building, but would provide some other benefits. And at the end, even though the cheapest option wasn't to put in aluminum railings, they did end up choosing to go that route and to fully remove the stucco wall, because they did actually have our backup information on all the different costs of them. So they saw exactly how much each sub was, their cost, how much labor we had in for the demo or the repair. They saw the different railing subs that we had and what their pricing came in, and they were able to essentially negotiate that part of the work, because there was from the start that design build trust between the 2 parties. So even when these large unforeseens happen in a design build or something like that, you can definitely start to have some additional information and sharing to make sure that the owner is comfortable and they feel like that they have transparency and they are getting the deal that they want. So that's one of the things is, it never hurts to ask for backup and transparency. And, if a owner and a contractor or vendor have a good relationship, it shouldn't be a problem. So some of the major, so we kind of talked about the procurement, the 3 different methods, some of the pros and cons, how to start a procurement process by identifying the problem, coming up with a list of expectations on the end goal, trying to get people to get to a similar end goal or a similar endpoint by kind of outlining it at the start. But there's also some other ways that you can get a little bit more out of the process that we don't see a lot of owners take advantage of. And one of the big ones is we do not see clients spend a lot of time post receipt of bids asking questions, or getting either contractors or vendors to come in and start and asking them some simple questions. Was there anything that you saw inside that bid or inside the specifications or drawings, that is a little more costly than what you've seen on other projects. So sometimes there's when we bid with a design bid build, we have to get the number in so that it is apples to everyone else. But sometimes we do see areas where there could be substantial savings, and sometimes it's the right decision, sometimes it's not. But it's always a good idea for the owner to know what those potential options are before it starts, so that they don't feel afterwards that they may be paid more than they needed to. Um, Also asking, sometimes it's not only about cost, sometimes it's about schedule. So sometimes an owner may have initially thought that they wanted to phase a project into 6 or 7 phases, and they come back and they get the schedule, and now it's a 3-year project, um, you know, but that was what they originally thought. So by bringing in the different vendors or contractors, they may be able to figure out what might be the most efficient phasing, and come up with a different plan to help save on schedule, which can be just as important as cost for some owners. And so, in a similar kind of vein, it's tapping the expertise of all the parties um, in that post receival of the final proposal. Can definitely help to maybe find some pretty substantial savings or schedule, or even just different options that people weren't thinking of on the original that came to light as there was a little deeper dive. And one of the areas that we see that it can particularly drive issues is when people get a little bit hung up on warranties. Warranties are are very important to some owners. They feel that a guarantee from a manufacturer gives them a sense of security and guarantee, but they don't. They should be very careful on what the warranty actually includes and doesn't include. Most warranties are really only for that the material itself came out of the factory in the condition that it says on the bucket, and that if it came out and it was applied correctly, that it would perform to what it says inside their product data or their literature. But to prove that, and generally that isn't the issue. The issue comes somewhere down the line in either even shipping. It was the material left in a rail car in Nevada and it froze overnight. And no one knew. So then does the manufacturer take it? Does the shipper end up having to cover it? Like those are all the things that aren't necessarily very clear in a warranty and can start to really drag out. Or can the contractor prove that they put it down at exactly the right conditions? Or is the material warranty going to basically try to throw every other possibility out there at it? So what we sometimes see is people get really hung up on warranties as the only way to comparably compare two products, projects, or other stuff like that. Would definitely recommend, rather than looking at warranties, asking the contractor or the vendor or the designer, what other projects is this down on? How has that performed? Tell me about some of the successes that's had, but then also tell me about when something went wrong, how was it handled? Did the manufacturer step in immediately and work with it to get it back on track, or did it end up getting dragged out over a few years, right? And what is what is the client looking at or looking for? Um, so just a little experience that we've had, particularly recently. And then of course, um, if there's changes during the process and you haven't kind of set it up from the start, where you've identified the issue, you really know what you're trying to get out of the end. You may get to the end of a project and find that it's not what you were hoping for from the start, right? So you thought you were getting there all the way to the end, and the example we used of owners saying, "Hey, we want a last American building," and then coming back and saying, "Why are our windows still not leaking?" or "Why are our windows still leaking?" Now you're going to have to possibly look at doing the work again to like address the windows or some other condition that wasn't really made clear from the start. And there can be large costs both in time and resources to doing that. So And then just other important considerations for any vendor, contractor, designer, construction manager. Looking for whether they have the appropriate licenses for your project and for what you're looking to do. Are they bonded or bondable? That's generally a little bit more of a contractor's form, but what insurance do they carry? How do they, what guarantees do they give? What training do they provide for their personnel, both general and specific? Do they have any training? How do they guarantee that you're getting the experienced journeyman or person in the field? What relevant experience they have to similar projects like yours? And then, what kind of scheduling are you looking at for your project? Where are you? Because sometimes that can be very different. Some owners are going to want projects to be done immediately. Sometimes that's not available. And then, of course, we always recommend that the owners actually do a presentation or meet with the decision makers, with the contractor, the designer, whoever, to make sure that they actually get to know each other a little bit and ask questions and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then what are their get their testimonials. What prior client experiences did they have that were satisfactory or not satisfactory? How was that handled? Just general background information. So hopefully that gave everyone a little bit of insight into how we see kind of projects start and the different ways that they can be kind of managed from before anyone even starts getting on site, and how to kind of maybe try to avoid some of those pitfalls inside of getting a project from conception or the issues or needs or wants of the owner all the way to the point where the work actually starts, so that by the end of the project the owner actually has what they wanted or needed there at the end. So thank you for letting me come and speak, and I will take any questions now that people might have, and or any other further clarifications I can give.
Hi, Sean. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm always impressed on how much you guys do. I don't see any formal questions in the chat, but it's not too late. So if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat room. In the meantime, I do have a question for you, Sean. I heard windows, pool decks, railings, stairwells. What type of services does Kavika's painting provide?
Yeah, so we so because we have our general license, we do act as a general contractor in projects, but where we've really specialized is in the what they call exterior envelope of buildings. So we belong to other professional organizations like SWRI, Sealant Waterproofing Restoration Institute, ICE, International Concrete Restoration Institute, and these other, because what we're really looking at is how to stop weather from damaging the interiors of buildings. That's kind of our specialty. Keeping water out of buildings all the way from the basement to the roof, and mostly in existing structures that have already been built, and trying to find and remediate those situations, or help owners stay on top of maintenance of those so that they don't end up in large, more costly structural fixes that they have across their buildings. So we're experienced with using subs for some of the other specialty things, but a lot of this really came about because we have a lot of experience in access on the outside of buildings. So by the time you're hanging suspended scaffold on the outside of a tower, you don't want to pay to do that a half dozen times to complete a project. And so kind of having someone who knows how to coordinate all that and get it all done in one setup of access for the building provides a lot of value to owners.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. And just a follow-up to that question is, you mentioned maintenance or helping building owners and managers to prevent from getting to that extreme major project. Is there a way that building owners and managers can help mitigate that need by working with you all?
Yeah, I think so. There's every building has its kind of its own unique challenges, and where they're going to have that pop up the most. One of the most common things that we're seeing in the age of the buildings across Hawaii, and where we're seeing people not quite keeping up with the maintenance. I think a lot of owners are fairly familiar with trying to paint every 7 to 10 years and kind of staying in that cycle. But most spall repair and other larger issues happen at what they call penetrations. And so a penetration in a building can be a window, it can be a railing post, it can be pipe supports depending on the building. And so particularly like in windows and railings and other flat horizontal surfaces, they don't have it on their radar to start maintenance of them. And so you see a lot of failed windows and people just complaining that it's leaking into their unit, and they just put a towel on the ground underneath it, where keeping on top of replacing the sealant around the perimeter, doing some gasket repairs, making sure that the weep holes are actually functioning, can be much less costly than waiting till you have to all of a sudden rip out all the windows, repair all the rotted drywall underneath the windows, redo the exterior siding, or do a bunch of spall repair on those window ledges. So just kind of taking those first indications that there's some issues, and then also when you actually do have your your painter, your window cleaner, or whoever go to do an assessment of it and take a look at that. That's a common area that we see not kept inside the maintenance cycle for buildings.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. So there's some questions in the chat room. One is, what is the best way to cover or coat insulated chill water pipes on rooftops? And this might be more HVAC related, but we're wondering, they were wondering if that's something that you guys could help with.
Yeah. So generally the insulation, if it was, if it's past its useful life, generally it needs to be re-insulated. Usually the damage to it isn't so much that, it's the point where it makes its way into the building or how they're attaching it to the roof. So, you see, especially on older buildings, they may have gone and done a roof recoating project or re-roofed the project, but due to the, the weight of the chiller pipes or them just not wanting to deal with it, they were never treated. And so then it becomes a area of weakness in the new roof. So we would generally say that for the actual insulation itself, that would definitely be more of, the HVAC guys making sure, getting that re-insulated. Particularly if you're starting to see your utilities switch a lot, that may be an indication that the insulation's no longer performing. But we would say, the structural supports, take some time to assess those, because that's much more expensive than just re-insulating if you now also have to replace all of your metal structural supports. And then making sure that where those are attached to the roof, that they're not causing damage, and that they're being addressed, and that whatever system you pick to keep your roof in good shape is actually integrated into those supports. And then where they enter the building, making sure that you're keeping that in a tight weatherproof condition. We also see a lot of lack of fireproofing in some of these penetrations, whether that was done by maintenance over the years or someone else who didn't know. But there, should take some care to make sure that the penetrations are actually put back in a fireproof condition, so that you're not creating a hazard to future residents or users of the building.
Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. To go along with that, they were wondering, I guess because you guys do painting, do you guys paint or coat or use any kind of covering for that kind of HVAC chill water piping, or you guys just have the insulators take care of that?
Yeah, so it depends. If it's, sheet metal or other, or the structural steel itself, if you're going to metal, then usually the two options that we would recommend are what um, MPI would call a light industrial coating. So usually that's a epoxy sealer as the first coat to try to lock down any starting formation of rust, have a fairly impenetrable surface, and then a easy single component high gloss like DTM top is what they kind of call the light industrial, and that's good for things that are still in fairly good shape that you want, that get fairly light use. You want maintenance to be able to touch it up as you go. It's going to have fairly good, UV protection and color fade. It's not going to be that much of an issue, and be fairly affordable and have maintenance able to touch it up. Or they have the what they would call the more the heavy industrial systems. Um, and so sometimes we even combine those two. So for the heavy structural components of the chiller, like your I-beams, your parts that they're not going to swap out ever, the parts that are actually tied into the structure of the building, where you go with, epoxy sealer, epoxy mastic, and then polyurethane top coats that are very rust and weather resistant, and help to protect those larger elements of it. If the pipe and the sheet metal is exposed, that can always be painted too with either of those systems. Um, but yeah, if it's insulated for purposes of energy efficiency and other things like that, then the insulators pretty much the only ones you want touching that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Quick question or just a quick announcement. This is recorded and it'll be on our website. And Sean, they were also wondering if we could share your slides. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, not a problem.
Okay, great. So we can put that up on the website. Next question is regarding waterproofing services. Do you utilize any infrared methods for detecting leaks, or do you sub that work out?
Yeah, so if so generally the infrared has its best benefit in roofing applications, where there's usually there can often be a layer of insulation or multiple layers of roofing on the building, and so it's not always obvious where the water is initially both coming from and where it's finding and settling into the low point of the roof. And so that's able to really show the conditions in a roof application, and we sub it out. There are companies that use even drones nowadays to get a view of the roof so that they can kind of see a larger picture of the roof at the same time, versus trying to go around from a more of a walking plane of surface or trying to get access to a neighbor's building. And those guys are very useful for trying to find that condition. On waterproofing, more related to parking decks or other areas where we're directly down to like a concrete substrate. Um, Usually, if there is a concern and it's not immediately apparent, then sometimes we'll use high voltage leak detection. That's able to basically they run a high voltage current with very low amps over the surface, and anywhere that it shorts or goes to ground is an indication that there's a pinhole or the mills are too thin in the system, and that can help to kind of identify areas that may be having issues in more of a conventional waterproofing application.
Well, thank you, Sean. Last question is lessons learned. Do you have any lessons learned or takeaways from the Ala Moana railing accident a few years back?
Um, I mean, it was a property we had walked a few times before it happened, and there's it's always hard for owners to know when that point is going to happen. Um, and budgets are always tough to balance. And I mean, I think that's the worst case scenario for any owner, is when they they were trying to walk that line and then they find out by an accident. You know, and that's always, I think, one of the biggest lessons or takeaways is that you know, it's always better to, you know, as a manager or, you know, as a vendor or anyone, is just to bring everything to their attention, get them the budget number as soon as possible, and make the owner, you know, aware and make the owner make a decision. Um, if the Because the last thing you want to be is in a position where the owner turns, you know, to you and says, hey, why didn't anyone tell me about that? Even if you did tell them about it, you know, if it's not really clear and inside your budgets and other things, you know, it's better to have the item there and have them say that they're not going to do it than to ignore it because they're telling you they're not going to spend money. Because, I mean, I think that's really the only takeaway, because I do believe they had budget pricing for a lot of those repairs. And, you know, for whatever reason, you know, it always fell lower on the priority list than other things.
Yeah, good advice, Sean. One more question popped in. Are there any new coatings that can help metal from rusting?
Um, there's a large gamut of materials out there, and there's a lot of different manufacturers. The generally the tried and true method though is the epoxy sealer, the epoxy mastic, and the polyurethane tops. There's some different top coat applications. The polysiloxanes are a little bit more durable than the polyurethanes top coats. But it all pretty much comes down to prep. Prepping the metal first is the thing that's going to get the best chance of success on the back end of the project. And unfortunately, a lot of locations aren't well suited for the extensive prep that creates the best result, which is also generally fairly expensive, and that's you know, that's sandblasting metal. You know, very hard to do in an occupied building, you know, or in areas that, you know, are up on roofs and other stuff like that. So just you know, making sure to be very thorough with the grinding, you know, the needle gunning, the other prep methods that are a little bit easier to do on commercial buildings, and then making sure that it gets sealed fairly quickly. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to prep, and prep is labor, and labor is usually the most expensive part. And no material saves poor prep.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's 1 o'clock, so, and that was our last question. We're so thankful to have you here today. Thank you again, everyone, for Kavika's Painting, our March Platinum sponsor, and for being here today with us. Check out our website where we'll have the recording uploaded as well as the slides. And I believe, Sean, your contact info is on that last slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. Please reach out to Sean. I know there's a lot of great questions, and he can dig deeper with you all and get you more answers. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you very
Sean.
much for
Thanks,
having me.
Kavika's Painting. Bye, everyone.